right, welcome everyone to our latest InterMET.digital webinar. Today we are kicking off our summer series on climate change. I'm your host, Dr. Sheldon Drobot, and by day I work on strategy and technology growth for Alfred Harris Space Systems. Today's webinar will focus on the business opportunities associated with the detection and monitoring of climate change and applying that data gathered to real-world problems. Let me introduce you to our three expert panelists, Paul Cachera of UCAR, the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research, and Connor of L3 Harris Technologies, and Paolo Ruti of the European Organization for the Exploitation of Meteorological Satellites, or EUMETSAT for short. Unfortunately, pressure of work and other commitments has forced our fourth panelist, Dr. Carolyn Clayson of the University of Plymouth in the UK, to pull out. Carolyn sends her apologies and hopes she can join us in a future webinar. Now, each of our panelists will open with a brief presentation, and when they've all finished, we'll move on to a group discussion and our audience Q&A. We've had some questions in advance, and we're hoping that you in the audience are keen to contribute your questions, plus any comments you might have via our Zoom Q&A facility. And one final word, please bear with us if there are any technical glitches. So let's move straight on, and let me introduce our first expert, Paolo Ruti, the Chief Scientist at EUMETSAT. Paolo advises the EUMETSAT Director General on all scientific aspects of the organization's strategy, including the assessment of new opportunities, while providing scientific leadership in bilateral and multilateral cooperation with other satellite operators and within the World Meteorological Organization. Previously, Paolo was head of the World Weather Research Division at the WMO, where he led the design and implementation of interdisciplinary research and innovation programs across geophysical and social sciences to foster Earth system prediction. He was also responsible for strengthening the value of science and decision-making through collaboration with co-sponsored programs, international prediction centers, science foundations, and UN organizations. So, Paolo, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you so much for this very nice introduction, indeed. And good day, everybody. Morning, afternoon, depending where you are in the world in this, let's say, virtual world, but we are speaking about real, concrete things today, and climate change is really something concrete that is affecting everybody's life. I would like to provide you, first of all, let me try to share this short presentation. I would like to share with you and to have a bit of giving you a few, let's say, few key elements that I think they are really relevant for the discussion today. I would like just to provide you three horizons, and let me first of all introduce the three horizon. So I think we have a bit of a problem here with one of the slides. So I don't know why it's skipping one, but doesn't matter. I will introduce the three horizons speaking. So the first is the try to observe the unobservable. And this is the first horizon. The second horizon is to work on multidisciplinary solutions. And the third horizon is to try to manage the complexity. And I will try to give you an overview, an idea what does it mean. But let's have a first try to understand what does it mean to observe the unobservable. There are key questions, key scientific questions behind. So if you are crossing a storm, we would like to observe all the small details of the storm, but we would like also to observe the interaction between the different scales of the storms. That is something typically we cannot observe. And this is to improve, of course, the prediction of that specific storm. Then if you move to the solutions, to what does it mean to build a multidisciplinary solution, if you are thinking to big questions such as the Paris Agreement, so how we can support the implementation of the Paris Agreement, how we can, for instance, concretely develop or support countries to develop their energetic plan, or how we can support companies, in any case, to monitor carbon sequestration facilities in the future. So you can see that behind the strategic question, there are very specific, a very concrete question that could actually hit the business model of several companies. And the third question is about the managing the complexity, and I will try to show you what does it mean into the space sector. That just try to have few details of what I want to say about the observing the unobservable. What you can see here is a picture of ocean colors from a satellite over the Barents Sea, and you can see a lot of small details here. And these you can observe, and I just drawn by hand, so it will be not so precise, but you can observe what is the mean flow over the Barents Sea, which is still a very confined, a small sea, but with a lot of interest because there's a ship routing across the polar regions and so on. So as you can see, you can observe small details, but you would like also to observe how those small details, they become or they provide the information to the mean flow that you can see and you can observe as soon as you navigate or you go across those seas. So this is a kind of things that we are trying to extend our capability into our satellite system. And this is what we are trying to do with our new generation, for instance, of geostationary satellites that we will launch next year, where we will try to have this four-dimensional view of what's happening to the atmosphere, from small scale to up to the large scale of a storm. And to capture all these details, of course, we need several collocated measurements from one single payload that allow us to develop this capacity. And this is what EUMETSAT is trying to do, for instance, in the near future. And this was the first element, observing the unobservable. The other one is building a multidisciplinary solution. And here you can see in this picture how we can reconstruct the detail of plumes from several industrial plants, observing from different satellite platforms. But this is the idea to develop in Europe a CO2 monitoring system under the Copernicus plan. There are other examples in US, in Japan, so we are not the only one, but this is just as an example to give you an idea that what is the interest now is to move from observing the detail of the carbon cycle to observe or to go close to the emission, because this is the tricky, let's say, endeavor that everybody would like to be now to support the development of the Paris Agreement. And this is an unprecedented, probably, challenge, because the level of detail, the quality of the measurements we need, and the also bringing together different type of measurements is becoming a very, very important challenge for the near future. The third element that I wanted just to provide you as initial idea is managing the complexity. This is more or less a kind of value cycle of a satellite system. So you go from left to right, and you can see from the different systems that you can have a geostationary satellite, you can have a polar system satellite, so rotating around the globe at 400, 700 kilometers. There are many. Or you can have a very small system of small satellite and constellation of small satellite, or CubeSat, that are becoming more and more relevant into the Earth's observation. But this is just one part of the beast. Then you go down, you have the ground segment, you have to receive this information. It's just not putting a satellite over there that is the only difficult part. You have to gather this information and you have to translate in an operational way and real-time way, because most of the application are real-time based. And also for climate, if you don't collect those real-time application, also on the long term, you will lose probably part of this information for your climate application either. And there's a lot of other steps, as you can see. And this is where there's a lot of, let's say, important new steps using new technology. You can think how to increasing the amount of data we are receiving. So we need to compress the data. And maybe this is where, I don't know, Netflix is giving us a very good idea how to compress the data and to transfer the data in the real time, or how artificial intelligence and machine learning is coming to become relevant in this context. But let me just conclude with this last slide. I think I would like to highlight three elements here on observing the unobservable system. I think one important aspect I would like just to highlight here is how we are the new generations of satellites. So how our geostationary, our new polar system will provide a lot of co-located measurements with an unprecedented capacity, and where also at the European level, the Copernicus Sentinels and the high priority missions in this case, where a lot of agencies, they are working together, it's an important contribution globally. Another important element into the building multidisciplinary solution to me is what is happening, for instance, at European level, it is the large scale endeavor where several agencies, they are coming together. And this is the value added that we have, where the new system on sustained systematic observation for the global greenhouse gas monitoring will be an important element. But I can quote here also air quality as another important downstream application area, which is extremely important. And we don't have time, but the space weather is extremely important as either. And the last element is managing the complexities, where we expect a lot of frontier engineering and new technologies coming, cloud-based solutions. I think we are moving towards putting our data, but also our application, and in the real time into a cloud-based solution, which is increasing the capacity of the system, but also increasing the capacity for stakeholders or small, medium company to interact with the data and to develop downstream services and new businesses. And this is probably the three main elements I want to put on the table. I understand that this is very, let's say, short presentation, that there's a lot of things we can say, but I think it's important to start a discussion. And I will stop here and to leave space also for question and the other two colleagues.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Paolo. We'll definitely be returning to some of those great points you've raised later on. I already see a few questions in the Q&A, but now let me introduce our next expert, Paul Cachera. Paul is the Assistant Director of the COMET Research Program at UCAR and leads the International Capacity Development Program for the Modernization of Hydrometeorological Services. Paul also runs UCAR's 3D printed automatic weather station project called 3D Pause. His recent and current projects include modernizing the weather services through numerical weather prediction, impact-based forecasting, observational network development, training, and developing low-cost, reliable observation networks. He's also involved in various WMO activities, including being a member of the Standing Committee on Measurements, Instrumentation, and Traceability Expert Team on the transition to modern measurements, and supporting WMO's public weather service trainings on impact-based forecasting and warning services for national meteorological and hydrological services. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sheldon. Thanks for that introduction. So let me share my screen here. All right. Yeah. Thanks again. I'm happy to be here today to talk a little bit about the innovative low-cost technology. As Sheldon mentioned, the 3D printed weather station project that we've been working on for environmental monitoring as a solution to help provide observations to monitor the climate. So it's just as a little bit of an introduction, this project's really focused on providing and developing low-cost sensors to support international capacity development, especially in areas where they're very data sparse, to kind of supplement the limited observations that are currently there. And the goal is to really build capacity for monitoring high impact weather, other solutions such as air quality, hydraulic events, and then monitoring for climate adaptation. And our goal is through this project is to communicate observations and warnings through local communities, through radio, through social media, things like this. And then the last kind of point is developing these networks and applications to reduce weather and climate related risk is a key goal for our project. So as Sheldon mentioned, we've developed an inexpensive solution using 3D printers. And why 3D printers? They're relatively inexpensive now. Allows local users to fabricate their own stations. It takes on the order of 1 to 2 weeks to fabricate each station. So it's not fast manufacturing, but it's steady that you can put out and build several stations a month and can expand your network. And what's unique about this is the cost per station is on the order of $500 US per station, which is really fairly affordable. And with the latest technology, there's a lot of low-cost, reliable microsensors that can be integrated into your station. A key aspect is it's a system that can be assembled locally, so it provides that capacity to build your own stations and not have to order and get stations from out of your region. And the nice thing about this is, as all weather stations or all sensors, they eventually fail. So this is a mechanism that you can print and replace the components during an entire system if a station fails, and keep that longevity of your data record going with very few data gaps. And the whole idea is to really provide local agencies to take ownership and build and maintain your observation networks. So on the picture on the right is our kind of current design of our automatic weather station. And we're currently, it can measure wind speed, wind direction, solar radiation, rainfall, and then temperature, pressure, and relative humidity. So it provides the basic parameters of a typical automatic weather station. We're also building a variety of other sensors to address other applications. For example, we've built a water level sensor to look at stream depth, for example, or irrigation canal monitoring, things like this. And this is just one of many different things that we're also working on, which also includes soil moisture monitoring and air quality monitoring, for example. So there's a lot of different applications that can be that can use this type of monitoring. One thing I wanted to highlight is that part of this effort is we're really focused on citizen science to really get the community together and outreach to bring out not only the future scientists, but teachers and local communities to really have their own information and embrace monitoring the weather and the climate to help address local issues in their region. So part of the program, most of our stations we've deployed around the world have really been focused on implementing them at schools. So this provides students and teachers with their own local observations to really start understanding their environment and climate change. It also supports student learning about these aspects where the observations and the data can be brought into the classroom, and the students can analyze data and really learn about their environment. Part of the aspect, and I'll mention this next, is this global connections with students around the world. So there's a program called GLOBE, which then integrates these observations with other places around the world to really start understanding the impacts of climate change for their region and also for other regions. So as I just mentioned, we've integrated a lot of our stations into a program called GLOBE, and GLOBE is Global Learning and Observations of the Environment. And you can see here, there's the GLOBE program is really inclusive around the world. There's on the order of I think it's up to about 130 countries now, and of course many more schools are involved, and on the order of about 150 million measurements have been made through this activity. And what's the nice thing about connecting our 3D POS project with GLOBE is that it really brings the science and the education and connects the networks of not only the students, the teachers, scientists from all over the world to understand and address different issues on a local to global scale, especially in the area of climate change. And through this program, there's a lot of learning protocols and activities, science symposiums, and then everybody, it's a free and open access to data that students and teachers and scientists around the world can use to really start understanding the climate. Just to kind of highlight our projects, we've installed networks in 12 countries now. We're hoping to expand this further around the world, especially after COVID ends, and to really kind of broaden that scope of observations to supplement what's already existing to address various issues and applications in the various countries. And one of the nice things about this is, if you're wondering, we do provide a comprehensive hands-on training through the COMET program. There's a lot of training modules, a lot of activities to really help support the implementation of observation networks, not only for understanding how to use the measurements, but also about the science behind those measurements. And then just kind of in here, I just briefly talked about the stations themselves, the project, but there's really a lot of applications, not only for the 3D POS stations, but for observations in general, for on the small scale or short scale weather forecasting, helping provide early warnings such as flash floods and severe weather, but also helping with engineering decisions like water resource management, agriculture applications, and of course on the larger scale, these observations can then help provide information about climate monitoring and climate adaptation. So I think with that, I'll stop there, and then I'm hoping we'll have questions later and we can explore some of these topics further. So thank you.
Yeah, great, Paul. Absolutely fascinating stuff. And we do have some questions already piling up, and welcome to get more from the audience. But let's move on to our next presenter, Ann Connor. So Ann is the Principal of Business Development for L3 Harris Corporation's Spectral Solutions in the Space and Airborne Systems segment. She assumed the position at L3 Harris in December 2017, serving as the primary customer interface with both NOAA and NASA stakeholders. She's also responsible for maintaining and growing space and airborne systems portfolio for this and adjacent markets. Previously, Ann was a professional staff member on the subcommittee for space for the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. She also has had various roles supporting government relations and advocacy for the aerospace and space intelligence industries. So Ann, please take it away.
Thank you, Sheldon. Appreciate that introduction, and it's been really interesting to hear kind of the wide range of applications for climate monitoring when you have what Paolo has discussed at the very high level space-based, and then down to the ground-based applications and hands-on work that Paul has been doing with UCAR. I wanted to talk a little bit about who Alfred Harris is, just really quickly, just to provide you some background. A lot of folks may not be familiar with our company. We've kind of merged and over time and compiled new companies and divested others. And so essentially we're a global aerospace company. We deliver end-to-end solutions. We're focused really on the mission critical needs of our customers. And you see that we have a pretty global base, 130 countries, 50,000 employees, and nearly half of which are engineers, which I think is really indicative of the culture and the talent that we have as a company. As we drill down and kind of get you into where I spend most of my time, we're within the space systems. Our group is Spectral Solutions. That's where we build advanced satellite sensors and ground systems. But you see that our capabilities range from ISR to imaging systems, position, navigation, and timing, and telemetry. So specific to our environmental satellite heritage is over 50 years of on-orbit mission success. We've delivered over 75 weather instruments for customers such as NASA, NOAA, Europe, Japan, and primarily their weather payloads. So the imagers, atmospheric sounders, but we've moved into also environmental payloads or climate monitoring, which is what we're here today to discuss, including some of them, measuring Earth's energy, greenhouse gas, water, and others. And so one thing I wanted to highlight is that our instruments are recognized for performance and longevity. These are highly exquisite systems that are purchased by government agencies typically, and are relied on for the most reliable and precise measurements so that they could meet their mission needs. And typically with the weather, for NOAA, for example, is protecting life and property. And so we take that very seriously and think that the missions are essential for how we develop and employ our technologies. So just real one more quick slide just to give you a sense of the entire range of optical measurements across the different wavelengths. We tend to focus on the long wave and infrared and mid-wave infrared. This is important for weather, obviously, temperature, humidity, moisture, precipitation, but it's also allows us to detect greenhouse gases, trace gases, be able to focus on water content and precipitation, for example. So you'll see these wide range of applications fit nicely into the climate and what kind of applications are needed in order to better monitor and detect, what's going on with our environment. And that's kind of what I wanted to get to. And Paolo brought a lot of the issues that I intend to talk about. He kind of brought to the surface. So I thought it'd be good to circle back and just explain, that you all know, most of the folks on the call, I assume, understand that Earth is a complex system that's not just one variable or another. So while our company may have focused on the weather instrumentation, for example, there's a lot of other applications, a lot of other measurements. What's the atmospheric composition? What's the carbon cycle? How is it interface with the oceans? What's the role of human interactions? And so all of these complex systems really it shows that climate monitoring is just not a one-size-fits-all solution, that it's really a complex physical system, but also a complex political system. And this gets a little bit to kind of the natural tension, I think, and some of the questions that climate monitoring is raising in these environments where, you know, we have seen political action. We see, for example, in the US, the Biden administration has really taken on a whole of government approach to how we are managing climate change. But what does that mean? You know, there's a lot of focus on regulatory compliance, or how do we meet the Paris agreements? You know, there's a lot of discussion on, you know, holding certain groups accountable, or how would they, you know, disclose climate risks. If you're talking about the insurance industry. And so you quickly see how complex all of these issues become. And then throw on top of that, you know, what's the role of science versus services? So with the science community, it's increasingly important, or incredibly important, to maintain highly accurate long-term data so that you can keep the low errors, uncertainties, you know, lower the uncertainties within the models. And so that precision is extremely valuable. And yet there are a lot of services that maybe don't need the level of fidelity, you know, that companies are trying to provide, you know, agricultural products, or even recreational products, like when to avoid certain coastlines because of harmful algal blooms, for example. And so you get this tension between what are the policies, what kind of politics are involved, how do you hold people accountable, but also, you know, how do you make profit from some of this information? You know, what's proprietary, what's considered a public good? And so all of these things are really opened up to me more questions than answers, and hopefully you know, these things will begin to shake out, and we'll start to see. But I like that we're even discussing all of these at a much higher level now, and realizing that the field is wide open, which kind of gets to the theme of our discussion today about business opportunities for climate change, and monitoring. And then, you know, in my mind, you got to segment it into markets that make sense, because you're not going to be able to tackle the entire Earth system, right? And that's kind of the role of governments, to do the higher level, very scientific inquiry and level of detail that's needed. But how do you make business cases out of that? Or where does that become where entrepreneurs or startups can take a look at where there's opportunities? And even with big companies such as ours, you know, trying to figure out where we fit in the role of those things. Having traditionally been a supplier to the government, you know, how can we utilize our capabilities to then service you know, more specific, unique needs within the commercial industries? Or how can we provide a new level of data to the government agencies that are responsible for the regulations? And so, you know, these are just a few of the areas that you could really dive into, each individually. Clearly, greenhouse gas monitoring is something that's risen to the forefront because of our desire to reduce greenhouse gases, and to monitor, and as a global community, you know, committing to making reductions in those. But how do you know you're making reductions, right? So you need to have these globally based, precise measurement systems in order to evaluate if you're making any progress or not. There's weather in the Arctic, as the Northern Passage opens, more both political as well as economic activities are going to be becoming more prevalent in the Arctic, and how does that impact business and economy as well as the environment? We've heard a lot this last year about fire detection, and the wildfires, particularly here in the Western United States, have become such a very imposing on our way of life. And so we're trying to deal with, how do you maybe detect it sooner? How can you predict fires? Is there a way to protect citizens that live maybe within that urban and forestry boundary layer, boundary line. Anyway, I could go on and on and on, you can see. And then, in the last column, I have integrating observations, like how do you get all of those together? And this speaks to some of the complexity that Paolo also raised with regards to the amount of data and being able to assimilate the data and maybe utilize artificial intelligence or machine learning to be able to be smarter about using the data. So really, I just wanted to leave there's opportunities against a wide range of areas, scientific decision support, and in a way, it's kind of like the Wild West when it comes to how are we as a society going to provide the data and services needed for us to really navigate what our future looks like. So this is, really fascinating to me. You see increased venture capital investments in some small startup satellite companies, for example. You're going to see companies such as ourselves bring to bear our expertise, in other areas. And so it's really wide open. And so look forward to the conversation and to see, what happens in the next 5 to 10 years, because there will be a lot of change, and hopefully some of these questions will start to be answered. And so that's all I have for right now. Thanks
Thanks
Sheldon.
very much, Anne. That's fascinating stuff. So we're going to move on to our Q&A session. And for those of you in the audience, there is a little Q&A window at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So please use that to ask some questions. But let's get started since we've got a bunch already lined up. And our first one, Paul, is to you. And the question, I think, related to your 3D printed weather stations is, how accurate are the measurements compared to other more expensive reference stations? And how do you calibrate them and then keep them calibrated?
Yep. Thanks, Sheldon. Yeah, those are some great questions. So the short answer is that all our comparisons that we've done with other calibrated reference sensors, the more standard sensors, is our measurements are very comparable. Within a few percent differences of what we're seeing, especially for like temperature, pressure, winds, so on. And we've done a lot of testing over the last 4 or 5 years. We have a field site here in Colorado where we have about 100 different sensors out there, and we do a lot of intercomparisons with those. We've been working with the U.S. NOAA National Testbed Center, and we've been comparing with their reference sensors and going through that process, and also have been very comparable evaluations or measurements themselves with these reference sensors. And then in the past year and a half, we've partnered with WMO and the Turkish Met Service to do a complete independent evaluation and calibration of our sensors to really have a document that we can share with the community to really that focuses on what is the accuracies and limitations and maybe reliability issues, things like this, and that's ongoing right now. And in terms of calibration, we've also the Turkish Met Service is calibrating our sensors in their laboratory, and we're also doing some calibration tests here at UCAR, and then also with NOAA. So we're in the process of really understanding and evaluating all those measurements and keeping them calibrated. In terms of calibration, we do checks in the field, and if sensors are out of alignment, which is the nice thing about the 3D printed weather stations, you just replace sensors as needed. So if something goes out of calibration, you can bring a new one out and very quickly exchange it with one that's been calibrated and keep the measurements going. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, quick follow on to that. This independent analysis that's being done by the Turks, when do you think that report will be available to the broader community?
Another great question. We were hoping to have have something done by the summer, but we've been delayed of COVID and everything. So I'm guessing it's going to be another year now, just because a lot of the activities stopped for this past year, just because people can go in the office and things like this. But yeah, in about a year from now, we're hoping to have at least a good draft report that we can share with everybody.
Okay, perfect. All right, Anne, this question is for you, a little philosophical. So, given the competing interests in applications for climate data, what do you think is the role of the public sector in providing data versus privately sourced products?
Yeah, thanks, Sheldon. I guess, like you said, philosophical. From my perspective, the public data as a good is kind of that baseline, the reference, as Paul was just referring to. You have to have that base source of data and information that is kind of given the seal of approval that says, yes, this is meets scientific standards, and it provides a level of certainty that other people can then base what they are providing off of. You have to have a reference source. And so just like you have to have a reference source with actual systems, you do need as well within products. As you develop products, how does the public know that this flood forecast has the fidelity of maybe something else that the insurance companies have provided, for example. And so I think there's, similar to what's already happened with the weather industry, where NOAA and EUMETSAT and others provide, the really high level of very exquisite data. And then you have value added services depending on what the niche is or who the provider is going to be. And they're able to take that information and make it valuable to, whatever application there might be, or whatever need there might be within the community. But I think you're still going to see privately fielded sensors and technologies and capabilities, and I really believe, the way the market works, it'll shake out. Like if someone's really not providing a service that's accurate or well established, then those will likely not be as successful. So I think, having the reference baseline, but then also, being able to tailor services based on specific customer needs is going to have to, again, shake out where the line really is. But you need that foundation, or at least standard of approval at the high level.
Okay, yeah, fantastic, Anne, thanks. All right, Paolo, this one is for you. It comes from John Smithson, and he's wondering where on Earth, I think like physically located, are the main gaps when it comes to measuring and monitoring climate change?
Okay, so let's first say that I think we need always to remind ourselves that there is a kind of backbone that we need to maintain. So we are custodian of gathering the data from satellite and other system, and to maintain those long-term records. This is an introductory statement, I understand, but it's fundamental to say, because without this long-term perspective of having those data for 30, 40, 50 years, we wouldn't be here discussing about climate change. So we would just look into consequences, but without an idea of what we are talking about. But there are certainly, answering this question, it means to look to the interfaces between the ocean, the sea ice, or to specific regions where we don't have so many data. So the polar regions is one example, the Arctic. We know that we need to get closer and closer to the land surface, to the ocean. Anna was mentioning one of her last slide, the ocean is certainly the interaction between the ocean and the atmosphere. It means a lot. I mean, if you are living on the coast of US and you are experiencing hurricanes, So the understanding and the information between the ocean and the atmosphere, what is happening, is fundamental to get a very good forecast. So that is one area where it is extremely important to have much more information, which rings a bell on the business sector, because it's not just with satellite, but you can complement with other measurements. And this is where complementarity and the business sector is extremely relevant, where we need complementarities. Another element is the integration of this information. It's not just per se, the value is not just per se in one single information, is the integration, as Anne was mentioning. So in the carbon cycle, in the CO monitoring, is not just monitoring one specific chemical species, but integrating the different information, aerosol, methane, and integrating in our models, the usual models we use for numerical weather prediction, that gives us a kind of a four-dimensional view of the system. And then we can infer a lot of information on, for instance, on how to support energy sector, or how to support carbon sequestration facilities. As you can see downstream, you can see a lot of business opportunities either.
All right, fantastic. So let's go next back to Paul. And Paul, we've got a series of questions kind of all around the same concept. So let me try and summarize this a little bit. So I think the general concept here is, how does one get started with a 3D printed weather station program? So Mohammed is specifically wanting to set up private weather stations in Nigeria, and is wondering if that's something you guys can help with. And David is more generally interested in figuring out, how do you determine which countries you're going to deploy the 3D pause in, and who do you partner with in foreign countries? So lots of little tidbits there, but the floor is yours to try and help us out here.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Sheldon. Yeah, great questions. The how to get started with the 3D printed project is the easiest would be to contact me, and we can start a conversation on how to go about a program. And in terms of where we've gone so far, it's really been a combination of working with agencies like USAID, World Bank, and now with WMO to kind of reach out to different, or I should say, countries reach out to either those agencies like WMO and say, we're interested in this low cost technology, and we work together on coming up with a plan and how to do the implementation and training and bringing this forth. We've really worked, it's really worked well working with the National Met Services. We've also worked closely with local universities and colleges to integrate 3D pause into their education and classroom, to develop that skill and capacity for young early career scientists, and that really helps. And we've also worked some with private partnerships, so working with them to help scale up the networks across the various countries. So I think there's a variety of ways that people can get involved and establish their own networks in country. So hopefully that answers the questions.
All right, great. And just for everybody asking questions kind of in this area, we'll have a contact information kind of at the end of the presentation here today, so you can fire on some more specific questions and we can get you in touch with Paul directly. So, okay. And we're going to go back to a bit of a policy question here. And the question is, if policymakers are making decisions based on data, which we hope they are, how can we be sure the data they are using is the most accurate? And can we help drive down uncertainties for them?
Sure, thanks. And this really gets back a little bit to what I was saying earlier before, the role of the public versus private sector. But how do we know the public sector is utilizing the data that's most accurate? So then you really get into, for example, if you have different groups monitoring methane, and each one of those has different fidelity in their data, then which one does the government use as the gold standard for what they intend to impose regulations on, or compliance measures. And so this is where I think it's really important to have a partnership with both the public sector and the scientific community to develop maybe international standards or scientific methodology that then gives any practitioner the confidence that that information was collected and utilized in a way that is most relevant for what they're trying to measure. So kind of, again, it's a little circular, and I guess, but I would say that we need to, as a community, if we're able to demonstrate the accuracy of our data and information, and then develop the standards so that the rest of the international community has something to measure by, then that way we know, kind of what the baseline is, similar to the global stock, for example, the stock take that the Paris Agreement, asked, every so many years, they have to have a kind of a retake of what's the impacts, and are we making any differences? So anyway, it's an ongoing process, but hopefully.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Ann. All right, Apollo, the next one is for you. And again, thinking back to the general scope of all these webinars around kind of the business opportunities, the question is, what do you see, or what do you think are some of the main opportunities UMETSAT new missions will offer to the user community?
First of all, I would say that in one word, the synergies. So the possibility for the polar system to have on the same payload the several collocated measurements will bring will extend our capacity to understand the three-dimensional structure, for instance, of the cloud. We will know much more what is happening in a cloud, and the cloud system is at the base for understanding or predicting any of the extreme weather events we are experiencing, and all the application you can imagine, agriculture, insurance sector, and so on. And the air quality is another area where the synergies between measuring aerosols or measuring nitrogen oxide and other species together, it certainly will improve our capacity to understand, to predict, and also to inform policies for air quality. So that's synergy is my first answer. Then the real time is another. I mean, we are an operational organization. So first of all, we provide products in an operational 24/7, and this is probably where there's a lot of opportunities and also problems, because when with the new geostationary imagery every few minutes over Europe, so every 2-3 minutes over Europe, it's a challenge to provide to all the customers on the real time at very high resolution. But that is where there are opportunities to use those data for nowcasting, for any other applications that where the granularity of the information is extremely important.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Paolo. So, Ann, we're going to go back to you for the next one. And this was from Jan, who has a very interesting question for you. Can you maybe provide an example of how L3 Harris is trying to position itself in this competing environment between policies and services?
Sure, absolutely. That's a tough question, but what immediately comes to mind most at the forefront for me, for example, is I mentioned methane, and there are a lot of different organizations, fielding methane, methane sats, GHG sats, I mentioned them in the slides that I had here. And while all of them provide good information, that's not necessarily the most accurate information. And what I mean by that is that maybe you're able to be the canary in the coal mine and saying, you know, this bad actor, oil and gas industry is really is not doing their due diligence in this region of the, you know, of the globe. But are they able to do anything with that data and make it actionable changes? And so that's where, you know, for us, we see our history and longevity of very precise, calibrated data sources as a benchmark, if you will. I mentioned international standards. You know, we see our role as really facilitating the not just pointing fingers or trying to say, oh, this policy or this actor is a bad actor, and so they need to act in this way, and really taking kind of the politics out of it. I guess I'm having a hard time articulating it, but really, how do you take the politics out of the policies and really show you know, specific measurements that then can be acted upon in a way that's beneficial to society. So for us, example would be the greenhouse gases. You know, there's a lot of monitoring systems, but are they really providing the fidelity of detail that allows individuals or companies or countries to do something about the data, as opposed to just waving the red flag?
Okay, fantastic. All right, so Paul, next one is for you. This is from James Anderson. And James wants to know, what is the plan for making it easier to integrate weather observations into GLOBE? And the side comment is, right now, there are problems with doing so in some international areas. So I guess you could agree or disagree with that statement and then go on to the question.
No, I kind of agree with that. We've been working with our GLOBE partners to integrate our 3D Plus data sets into the GLOBE database, and they've made progress in developing new interfaces that allow a lot easier access into their database. So we're hopeful that with a little bit more development, that the observations can go directly into GLOBE for a variety of different data sources or observation sites or weather station types, I should say, and would greatly expand the data sources that are available in the GLOBE, the overall GLOBE database. So I think there is some positive movement, but it'll take a little more time to get all those different interfaces working and tested into GLOBE. So, but there is hope. So.
Great, always good to know there's hope.
Yeah.
All right, Paolo, next one for you, very specific from Abdullah. He wants to know if there is a public data set related to seasonality of temperature, and I think you'd probably be the best one of this group to try and point him in the right direction.
Let's see if I well understood the question, first of all, because maybe in case there will be additional. Let's say that in Europe, we have the Copernicus service, especially the Copernicus Climate Services, where you can get a lot of data, and you can just Google C3S Copernicus, you will certainly find a lot of information. So the idea is that all the data that we are discussing now, that Paul and Anne also presented, they can have a direct use by a specific customer, or they can be integrated into our numerical weather prediction systems, and then providing a continuous vision or view of what is happening over the Earth, and accumulating these, piling up this information for 30, 40 years. That this is becoming a kind of important fundamental data set. And this is kind of the way we try to reproduce the climate. So integrating more and more data into more and more sophisticated models and providing such integrated view or seamless view of the Earth system. So this kind of information is available, and I think it's free available into the Copernicus system as other system in US, Japan, China. I mean, I'm not, and this is certainly useful for scientists, but also for the business sector if they want to translate this into information, because you previously mentioned the end user or the customer of a specific company. That there's more and more the need to work on the way we translate this data into information that is becoming actionable.
Okay, thanks. And again, if there's more follow-up from the audience on that, we'll have a contact note at the end of the talk here. And Paul, we're going to go back to you for the next one. So this comes from David. And David says, you mentioned that you're working with the WMO. What value do they ascribe to the data from your low-cost weather station solution, given their rather rigorous and precise recommendations for the most common meteorological measurements?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And that is a great question, and we're still working that process. And just to say, as much as possible, we're trying to adhere to the WMO standards for observation, site selection, and development. But what our goal was is to really, in terms of value, is to be specific to applications. An example I want to give is like our wind measurements are at 2 meters, not 10 meters, for example. So this could be useful for agriculture applications, but not for aviation, for example. So in terms of we're trying to be as much as possible application specific, so that our stations can address various applications that might be useful for various communities, but also be clear that it might not meet the needs of other applications, like I said, for aviation. So we're trying to sort that out so that when we give guidelines that not only our stations but other stations are being developed, low cost, innovative Internet of Things, that it could be specific and addressed to those applications. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, all right, great. Thanks, Paul. All right, so Anne, we got yet another policy question for you, sort of. So the question is, what is the role of scientific advancement in the context of decision support tools, and where do they converge?
Yeah, so again, I feel like I ask more questions than answer, per se, because that is a really great debate on where do those things come together. I think it's an iterative process. It's going to take time, right? With just any information, there's the research aspect of it, and then there's the operations aspect of that. And that's, here in the US, it's kind of a dividing line. We say NASA does the research and NOAA does the operations. And so really, as the scientific tools and methods become more well understood, as well as the instrumentation that build those, then it's you're in the spot where you can transition something into a more operational construct that then really can support the decision making tools. It gives you the confidence that you've kind of worked through all of the different error bars and all the different statistics and different variables, and gotten to a place where it becomes very applicable to whatever the particular product is. And so that line moves a lot, but I think the point where certain information becomes useful to make decisions on what to do next is a good indicator of where maybe the research stops and the operations begin. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but.
Well, we'll see if there's any follow-on questions from the audience. They can throw them in, and
Yeah.
we'll
Okay.
see what they think. So, all right, Paolo, this one for you, a little more philosophical perhaps as well, but how do you think the digital transformation is going to affect the space sector and its further development?
Okay, I don't know who really has this question. I mean, and that's probably, it will be, I think we will see in 5-year times if whatever we are saying today it is of relevance, because I think that what is happening so fast, and COVID demonstrated that there are already changes in the way we are working, the way we are developing the business, that it doesn't take 5 years, it takes 6 months, 12 months. So I think that's, I would say that I would probably put on the table 2 elements. One is we are moving towards a cloud-based solutions. I think the way also the satellite sector is working now is to move the data into the clouds, which is not just a terabyte question or issue. Is the way what are the software we are using to make those data easier to access from different customers, with kind of a software or services we are providing to the customer into this cloud-based solution. This is affecting all the sectors, research agencies, agencies such as EUMETSAT, which is an international organization, or I suppose Anne can speak about how it's affecting companies in this sense. So this is, first of all, the main element, which opens the door to many business applications, business question, opportunities, thread, etc. We know, for instance, that we are supposing that most of the Python software we are using, maybe there are students or young people attending this session, but we are thinking that those software, they are there forever. In reality, if you looked or you read several reports, you will see that they are not well maintained or well funded in reality. And this is, in few years' time, can be a threat. And so there's a question mark such is very simple into this context. The other big answer is, or big topic, is how it will change the way a company or an organization such as EUMETSAT, but even NCAR, a university, will change the way the people they are working together. So moving from a hierarchical structure to a network structure, which is a nice slogan, very nice, I understand, but there are several open questions we don't really have an answer. We are exploring now today in the last 12 months because of COVID, most of these changes.
All right, fantastic. So we're getting near the end of our questions. I'm going to share a window here that has a follow-on. If you have questions after the fact or want any follow-up, email Ian Harper at ian@moneyvista.co.uk, and he can put you in touch with any of our panelists. So a couple last questions here. Mohammed, yes, the webinar has been recorded, will be available on the InterMET.digital website, or you can contact Ian directly for a little bit more information there. So let's see, Paul, looks like we have 2 left for you. First is a quick hitter. How long do your weather stations typically last?
That's a good question. So in our original design that we started about 6-7 years ago, we had designed the stations to last for 2 to 3 years, but what we've been finding with some of the latest technology and materials that are resistant to UV radiation and elements, we have stations right now that have been running for 5 years continuously, since the start of our latest development of the project. So we're hopeful that they'll continue to run for some time, But what I wanted to mention is that what's nice about our station is that when components do fail or break, they can be printed, assembled, and replaced. So that's the whole idea, is that the station will run continuously, and you just upgrade components as needed along the way to have a long-term continuous measurement.
Excellent. All right, Paul, then the last question for you. It comes from John Smithson. It says it's great that you get into the schools, but is there also an opportunity to link this activity to help the older school students understand career potential of climate sciences? And I think the answer is yes. So maybe have you guys been doing much in that way to try and think about developing these students?
There's, yeah, actually we've thought about this a lot. We have not done a lot in the national community, but here in the United States, we've been working closely with some of the native tribal colleges in high schools to bring our stations into their academics, and then it basically really help them give them tools to address climate change, climate issues for their local community, to try to, yeah, just as you get them excited to have a future career in these fields. So yeah, there definitely is a lot of interest, and I'd be happy to talk about ideas to extend this further if possible.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, thank you, everybody. We've reached the end of our questions. So many thanks to Paolo, Paul, and Anne. And again, any further questions should go to Ian in terms of reaching out to our panelists or getting copies of anything you might need. We typically have a little outro that we'd play now, but Ian sent me a note that he's had a power failure at his place and so cannot run that. So I'm just going to close us off for today with thanks to the audience for being here, and stay tuned. Again, this was part 1 of our climate change summer series. Our next talk will probably be in July or August timeframe, where we'll be focusing more on modeling of the future climate as well as data analytics. So stay tuned, and thank you for your time. Have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, and we'll say so long for now.